no point did he tell me not to be angry. Rather, he showed me what I was angry at. I was angry at the exploitation of the system. I was angry about racism. I was angry about war. And this person, and along with working with the Answer Coalition, showed me that that anger, when combined with the anger of thousands of people just like me, could be used to create the kind of force, the kind of movement that could change history. So please welcome Brian Becker, the National Coordinator of the Answer Coalition.
Thank you, Peta. And I remember when we met as well. She was, I think, 17. And a couple of days after we met Peta, because she got a leaflet at the subway in Washington, she spoke at a press conference condemning the Bush administration's policies, pro-war and anti-people policies. And that's another part of the legacy of the Answer Coalition, is that from the beginning we have tried hard and made it a priority, in fact, to promote and mentor and facilitate the leadership of a new generation of activists, recognizing that it will be, as it always has been, young people who stand up and accept responsibility and make the commitment and demonstrate the energy. They're the ones who change history. And we're seeing that right now, sisters and brothers, because today more than 1,000 cities around the world organized Occupy demonstrations, and it is a massive movement, and it targets the military-industrial complex and the banks and the Pentagon, and it says we are the 99%, and that there is a new struggle. But I want to take the few minutes that I have here on the 10th anniversary of when we started Answer to draw a lesson about where we were 10 years ago and where we are now. And I want, even though I know we're celebrating, I want to take a moment that's not simply a celebratory sort of presentation. So I'm going to ask your indulgence on that. On September 11th, I was in Lower Manhattan when the plane struck the World Trade Center, and we saw the towers fall, and thousands of people died, workers who committed no crime. They had just gone to work that day. They were black and white and Latino and Arab. There were many religions. It was a terrible crime. And there was also such rage and hysteria against those who perpetrated the attack that George W. Bush could immediately go into motion and galvanize what amounted to be not only a strategy for war, but something of a war hysteria. For those of you who are too young to remember it, I'll say it, because the people who are old enough to remember it don't need to hear it. On September 11th and 12th and 13th and 14th, the whole country was positioned to go to war. George W. Bush had an approval rating of 90%. That's hard to believe now, that George W. Bush could be liked by anybody. But he had the approval rating of 90%. Under those circumstances, we said the Bush administration will take advantage of this terrible crime to carry out a new stage of imperialist war, and that we must fight back. We must organize. And very few people wanted to join us at that time, because it meant going not only against Bush, but it meant going against your neighbors. It meant going against your co-workers. It meant going against the media. There was a hysteria. The people who formed Answer were a wide variety. There were some who are socialists. I am a socialist. I am a Marxist. There were others who were Muslims. There were others who were Christians. There were others who were immigrant rights advocates. There were the Korean activists who had fought so long for the reunification of Korea, a country that had been cruelly divided and continues to be cruelly divided today. 60 years after the Korean War, the so-called Korean War. We found allies, sisters and brothers, and we used the criteria, not of what books you read, not what God you prayed to, not what nationality you were, not what ideological or theological or philosophical position did you have that might bring you in common with others. That was not who the Answer Coalition was. The Answer Coalition was all of the people, all of the organizations, regardless of ideology, regardless of philosophy, regardless of theology, who said right then and there, when it was very hard, we will stand together, we will unite, we will tell the truth, we will start to organize against the Bush administration, not when it was unpopular, but when it had 90% approval rating. In other words, we found amongst ourselves those people who were not afraid to fight. And that's who the Answer Coalition is. That's who it's always been. The people who are not afraid to fight. Now, I want to go forward to where we are today and summarize one or two lessons from this experience. Of course, we need to write a book about the last 10 years because it's a rich history and it will be forgotten. You know, almost to the day that the Answer Coalition formed, there was another anti-war coalition 100 years earlier. It was called the U.S. Anti-Imperialist League. It was organized by Mark Twain and other anti-imperialists. It was to protest the genocide against the people of the Philippines in the so-called Spanish-American War. And that was a great movement, like Answer was. Tens of thousands of people in 1900 and 1901, they came into the streets. But how many people know about the U.S. Anti-Imperialist League? Very few. It's not discussed. It's been largely erased from history, even though it was a very important part of American history. We don't know that Mark Twain was the leader of an Answer-like coalition 100 years before Answer formed, but that was the reality. It's important that we're having the 10th anniversary, not just to have good food and good drink and to see each other, but to take stock of what this 10 years means, to try to understand it in its foundational and deeper sense. Yes, Bush was the president, and we organized against Bush, and those of you who were with us know that we had hundreds of thousands of people, millions came out to stop the Iraq War. And then the war happened anyway. And some people lost faith, and they said, well, you had 1 million people. You had millions of people, but what good did it do? You didn't stop Bush. And so, at a certain point, people said, well, you know, the solution may not be demonstrating. The solution may be something else. The solution might be, let's get rid of George W. Bush. Let's use the electoral arena and make a change where it might matter. Let's get rid of Bush. Let's get rid of the Republicans. Let's get rid of the neoconservatives. Let's get somebody else. And in fact, in 2008, the election of President Obama was the byproduct of a mass movement of people, black and Latino and working class whites, who found the greatest unity to elect a black man to be the president of a most racist society in history, something nobody thought was possible, and that channeled enthusiasm, that quest for justice, went in and we elected President Obama. Not answer, but the broader movement. And now we've had another experience because Bush is gone. Not only was President Obama popular and a liberal and a Democrat and not George Bush, he had the majority in the House of Representatives, a big majority. And he had a big majority in the Senate. And after 3 years, when we look around, what do we see? We see that the war in Afghanistan has not ended, it has expanded. The occupation in Iraq has not ended, it will continue. The war against Libya began and continues. Korea remains divided. The Philippines is still suffering. 40 million people are out of work in the United States of America. 2.5 million are in prison. More people are in poverty now than 3 years ago. We had the Democrats. We had President Obama. He is definitely not George Bush. And this experience was a useful and necessary experience for those who said to us, your demonstrations don't matter. Street actions don't matter. We need a new president. We need a new Congress. Well, we have a new president. And we have a new Congress. And conditions of war and peace, of racism, of unemployment haven't changed except that they have gotten worse. And so this lesson now has been incorporated into our thinking and into the thinking of all of the people who supported President Obama and the Democrats in 2008. And now instead of thinking every day, what will we do in 2012, they're thinking, what will we do right now? And we're going to occupy Wall Street, and occupy Los Angeles, and occupy Chicago, and occupy all the cities around the country, and indeed around the world. Nobody can think right now, if only we could elect a Democrat, that things will be better, because we just did that. The position of the Answer Coalition, what we stand for, what we started with, was this inestimable faith that the people of the United States would end their apathy, end their political inactivity, end the conservatism, start to go into the streets, start to struggle, not because they read Mark Twain's Anti-Imperialist Manifesto or Karl Marx, although I think they should. They're not going to go into the streets because they read the books. They're going to go into the streets because there is no option but to resist and rebel and fight back, and that's what we see is happening around this country right now. So we've had a decade of rich experience, a rich experience. And we see now, 10 years later, that the movement has entered a new stage. When they say, when the people who are demonstrating, there was thousands today in New York City, thousands. You know, yesterday the mayor said, we're evicting you at 6 o'clock in the morning. At 4 o'clock in the morning, we had 3,000 people surrounding that park. 3,000 people. And then suddenly, the mayor and President Obama had to think, while this movement is spreading and proliferating, not at the ballot box, but in the street, they had to think, do we really want the image of bloodshed down in the middle of Wall Street against peaceful protesters? Will that work? Will that make everybody want to go home? Or will that make people angry and decide we will not be intimidated, we will not be repressed? In fact, any repression will only stimulate more resistance and more protest. And so the mayor backed down. And the young people took off all through lower Manhattan. They were chanting, victory, victory, we have won. Not because a politician saved them, but because they saved themselves through the mobilization of the people. That's what we are for in the Answer Coalition, the mobilization of the people. UFCW, who are fighting for the grocery workers. How will the grocery workers or the Verizon workers or public sector workers win when we struggle together and fight together? That's how we'll win. It's always been that way. So 10 years after the foundation of Answer, we're very optimistic. We're very, very optimistic because you look around the room, you have Koreans, Filipinos, Mexicans, Black Americans, white Americans. You have people from all races and nationalities, and they're saying one thing: we are united against a system that brings war and unemployment. We are united. We are united because under a truly democratic system of the 99%, for the 99%, by the 99%, everyone would have a job, everyone would have the right to go to a doctor when they're sick for free, every mom and dad would have free child care, everybody would have the right to go to school for free. All of these things would be free because we get rid of the military-industrial complex, close the military bases down, and say that the money expropriated by Wall Street and the banks, that's coming back to serve the people rather than the rich. That's what we can do, sisters and brothers.